Hey, what's up, guys? Gabriel here with wildwhetstones.com, and I've got this really nice pearl duck. This is a vintage German razor, and I want to sharpen it today and just talk briefly about natural sharpening stones and synthetic ones, and a quick understanding of coarse, medium, and fine grits. There's a lot of ways to skin the cat. You could pretty much just do one stone honing if you've already got a razor that's shaving well. You really only need finishing level stones like these ones. An 8,000 grit synthetic stone at least or finer is kind of considered the starting point for polishing of razors. And natural whetstones, you could ballpark as at least 8,000 grit or finer for them to be considered a finishing stone. Then you also need a way to establish your coarser grit, which would be your grinding the initial bevel. And so for that, you probably want a 1,000 grit stone. You don't want to go much coarser than about 600 grit. And the reason for that is you don't want to put massive gouges in the bevel. Now, you could use a 220 grit like this Imanishi, but stones like that get really crunchy, and you kind of have to not overdo it. So if you're going to sharpen any lower than 1,000 grit, you want to be aware that you're not pushing and grinding too hard, because it's really easy to lose the spine to edge ratio. So let's get into a bit of honing and sharpening and grinding in the reverse order of that. So you grind to shape the bevel, and then you sharpen, and then you hone. And that's basically the 3 stages. And you don't have to use a zillion stones to do so, but it helps. The more stones you have in your arsenal, the more effects you can create. But generally, the 2 stages of a razor is set the bevel, and then if you're just using a 1 stone hone, do mid-range and polishing next. But you gotta have your initial shape. Okay, so this is an old razor. It has some chips and flaws in the edge, and it's a little dull at this point. This thing probably hasn't shaved a face in close to 100 years. These are made in Solingen, Germany, as far back as like 1930, I believe. If that's not quite the right date, it's within plus or minus 20 years of that. Okay, so let's talk about the coarse bevel setting stage of sharpening straight razors. And I'm also going to throw in a bonus for you guys. Consider that coarse grinding is also something that applies to your stones. So this is an example of a very, very coarse diamond plate. This is the Atoma 140 grit. And this is more of a middle of the road. This is a 600 grit. And I really think you need at least a 140 grit diamond plate, and then potentially a second one that's smoother. The reason for that is these create different surfacing effects of your stones, and different surface conditions of stones change how they sharpen. Also, this is a go-to if you have a razor that's really beat up. You could do extremely coarse repairs that are very fast cutting and leave deep gouges with a diamond plate. Don't recommend that unless you absolutely have to, but if you have cleanup stones, it's pretty quick and easy. So, slurry, as well as flattening your stones, as well as sharpening and doing repairs, and these are great for knives too. Now, for bevel setting, you really need a stone that's around the 1,000 grit ballpark. Now, with synthetic stones, the grit rating's really easy, but you have to consider the quality of the stone. I really like Naniwa Chaucera because they're hard, they have a lot of abrasive particles in them, and they sharpen very fast. Now, you could go a little bit coarser in your coarse stage and maybe consider 600 grit, but this is a very raspy, rough feel on an edge, and it's going to leave deeper gouges. So what you set the bevel with is going to make a difference in how much cleanup work you have to do. Today, I'm going to show you guys the moss flower sharpening stone. This is an excellent coarse sharpening stone. And for fun, I'm going to do today's progression just with natural stones. So these stones, I would say, are similar to Aoto stones from Japan that are natural whetstones, and that's A-O-T-O. I think Aoto is the right way to pronounce it. And they're a similar grayish or dark blue kind of a color like these ones. Now, this stone, I would say, has a range, and I would say the range is between 600 and 2,000 grit. And the reason it has a range is if it's textured a little rougher, then more of the grit is exposed and the surface of the stone releases that grit faster. Whereas if it's slurried with a finer stone, then it's closer to 2,000 grit. When slurried with that real fine stone and sharpened on and smoothed in a bit, it starts to act closer to the Green Brick of Joy, which is a really nice 2K stone. Now this might polish a little finer, but it leaves those linear types of scratches, whereas this could leave a bit of a hazier finish, but similar ballpark when you make it smooth. Now I don't have it smooth because I want it to be a little bit more engaging. So let's get into it. Okay, to establish the bevel, I'm going to do 10 strokes. And 10 strokes on the other side. And now I'm going to reduce that ratio to 7. And then 5. And then 3. And now we're just going to do a few extra on each side. And I'm going to cant the razor and kind of hone in the scratch pattern. And we'll see if we've got a positive bevel set. And the reason I'm canting the blade is so that when we transition, we can see when we've removed this scratch pattern. Now you'll hear that's got that raspy kind of a sound. This is a really nice coarse grit stone. It's very hard. It does not absorb water very quickly. You don't want to soak natural stones, but you don't have to worry about them coming apart how ceramic stones do. Ceramic stones, when they start to lose their binder, you could absolutely wreck one. So this one I don't have any worries about keeping quite wet with lots of splash and go, and it doesn't really absorb water very quickly, so that's nice. Now with this stone, if you sharpen on it for a while, it gets a little bit finer. If you do knife sharpening with it and you use more pressure, it will auto slurry, but with lighter pressure with a razor, I don't really get that. All right, seeing it pick up the water line nicely along the whole edge. I'm feeling and getting that engaging feel. Light, kind of a sandpapery feel from this surfacing. Now, because it's picking up water across the whole edge like that, and I can really feel what I'm doing, I'm gonna give it a little thumbnail test. This is similar to the grape or cherry tomato. You just wanna see that the razor doesn't skip a spot and that it cuts a line into your thumbnail. And I'm not pushing hard enough for it to go through my thumbnail. With that positive thumbnail test, I can tell that the bevel is set. At that point, I can try shaving arm hair, and just out of habit, I like to go back to the stones. So just to make sure that my thumbnail test didn't dull the edge, I like to go back to the stone and give it a few more swipes. So let's do that. And then I'll show you guys what this scratch pattern looks like under the microscope. So there we see those scratches canted in this kind of a direction. And if you look at a 1000 grit sharpening stone scratch patterns, it's comparable. Now there's a bit of that hazy type of a polish behind those real linear scratches. And that happens to be the effect of the natural stone. They really give a finer finish, but because I textured it with a diamond plate, a lot more grit's exposed. So you really get an aggressive cutting grit, and the moss flower is a excellent utility stone. You could use it just to keep your kitchen knives going. You could use it to bevel set razors. It's a really good go-to initial sharpening stone. Now let's go back to the stone and I'll show you guys what I mean about the range of the stone. We originally flattened with 140 grit Atoma diamond plate. Now let's do the 600 grit DMT diamond plate. A really quick thing you guys can do to make sure your stones are flat is pencil grid. So I don't need to get too fancy or crazy with it. I just need a a line that I could see get wiped away. This is gonna tell me if my stone is flat all the way. I like to keep some gently running water so that I don't have too much stiction. And you don't have to have a diamond plate, but if you do, it lets you work with slurry. So that's when I save the mud for increased cutting speed and better polishing abilities. Now, you don't want to let your stone go dry, so you want to keep it wet. You want to keep your hands super clean, and you don't want to contaminate the surface while you're working with slurry. Now, I don't know if you can hear the difference, but I can really feel the difference. Now the stone gives a silkier feel. There's still a bit of that nice, audible, sandy feel, but the feedback has totally changed. So now, although the grit particle sizes of the stone haven't changed much, how they're exposed has changed. And the surface of the stone being conditioned smoother has a bit of an effect on the sharpening. Really, particle sizes aren't changing that much. They're not really getting that much finer from being broken down while sharpening, but there's a little bit of an increase. So when you make a slurry, you'll notice that it kind of has a breaking point where it starts to get a little bit more of a glazed type feel. Some of that is microscopic particles of metal are burnishing the surface of the stone a bit, and some of it is that the binder around the grit is coming free in your slurry. And the slurry gives you some cushion. It gives nice glide. Now, although this is getting finer and smoother, to me, this is not a level that I could do finish level sharpening on. But it's an excellent bevel setting stone. And again, the range is somewhere between 600 and 2000 grit. You could eke maybe a little bit finer than 2K if you really play with the polishing abilities, but that's a fair estimate versus other stones. And I really like to think of naturals just in ranges like coarse, medium, and fine. I don't get too hung up on assigning grit ratings. Like I'll say beyond 8,000 grit or below 1,000 or 20 to 30,000 grit, but those are very, very wide estimates. The last technique we'll cover here real quick, guys, is if you polish with running water and very light pressure, you're inviting the stone to do the least amount of scratch depth. So any particles that come loose get washed away, and this keeps your blade gliding. Those lines are a lot fainter, and that much more hazy polished look is coming out now that we've changed up our techniques. And so that's why I say that natural stones really have a range to how you use them. Surface dressing changes cutting action, but stones have limits. So the moss flower is a really good coarse bevel setter. Let's go on to polishing next. For polishing straight razors, I really love natural finishing stones. This is the yellow ivory and this is the white ivory. Now, both of these stones can be finishing level, and a lot of people have been asking me, how do they choose between the two? Well, first of all, you want to consider that they're beyond 8,000 grit. That's my fair estimate because they completely wipe away the scratches from an 8,000 grit Snow White Naniwa and provide an exceptional level of finishing. Now, the biggest difference between these two and the easiest comparison that I could make is that the yellow ivory is much more like a kiita, in Japanese, yellow egg. And the white ivory is much more like a hard asagi or asahi stone. And so if I had to put hardness level ratings, this would be a 4.5 to a 5. So it's just soft enough that you could still do knives with it as a harder knife finishing stone, but it's hard enough that it really does an awesome job for razors, and it cuts extremely fast, super fine grit. Then you've got this, which is similar to like a Mizu Asagi or maybe like an Akuto or an Ozaki Asagi that I've had in the past. And it's that really kind of gray to white color. This is a harder stone. Now, the particle sizes just get a little bit finer, so really you could use either for razor finishing. And I've already done several videos using the yellow ivory. So today I'm going to show you guys how quickly the white ivory stone can take that coarse bevel setting grit that we created over here with the moss flower and take the razor to a finish level polish. And again, just to reiterate, if you're sharpening tools that require a really hard, really fine stone, I would lean towards choosing this one. For razors, either one is fine enough. This one is easier to slurry. The yellow ivory makes slurry very quickly. And when sharpening knives, it'll auto slurry a bit on its own. This one won't do much auto slurry at all, unless you really pushed hard, which would be too hard of pushing for knife polishing and finishing. So do I notice a big shaving performance difference? In a blind test, I don't think so. Maybe if I knew exactly which razor was honed on which, I might feel like this is just a little bit keener and sharper, but it's hard to say, and it might be personal bias. Slightly softer razor finishing stones kind of have a more mellow edge. It's still a laser sharp, straight razor edge. Whereas like this is gonna give you like that keen, super, super sharp, very, very closer shave. Not to say that this isn't a close shave, it just maybe slightly more mellow and face friendly. So if you're trying to choose finishing stones and you have very sensitive skin, you might consider finishing stone that's like level 5 instead of like level 5++. And that's a scale of 1 to 5. So, you know, the hardness of these moss flower stones is probably 4, 4.5. Whereas like, you know, really soft stones are considered like 3.5 and below. So hardness, grit level, and how much grit and cutting speed are all factors. The moss flower is pretty quick when lapped rough, and so are these stones, but you really want a finer surface texture if you're polishing razors. So let's get into that next here, and then we'll show you what the scratches look like under the microscope. Okay, here we are with the white ivory finishing stone, and I'm going to show you guys how quickly it wipes away that 1000 grit ballpark of scratches. I'm using my 600 grit DMT diamond plate, and it's rather worn out, which is good because it doesn't create as rough of surface texture, and it makes extremely fine slurry that's exceptionally fast cutting. You really will notice the difference if you have both the yellow ivory and the white ivory, and how much easier the yellow can be slurried versus the white. Doing my press technique to try to save the slurry. I don't want my slurry super watered down, but I also don't want it ridiculously thick. If it's too thick, you kind of run the issue of slurry blunting or larger particles. And as I'm adding some more water, I'm washing what's on the blade back onto the stone, just to try to save a little bit of extra slurry here. And as I'm honing, I'm watching, and the slurry starts to get a little bit darker pretty quickly. That's the swarf from the stone, carving away and grinding off metal from the razor. Now I'm adding water just to keep things moist. I'm not really trying to intentionally dilute the slurry. I like to have some cushion under the edge when I get started and transition my scratch pattern. Okay, I haven't been counting my strokes, but I can definitely feel the razor starting to stick. Going to transition to some running water. And at this point, you can hone to your heart's content as long as you keep the right angle. Over honing is a myth as long as your pressure is even. As long as you keep the proper ratio between edge and spine and you don't mess up your stroke, you're good. Now, I will say that for beginners, a slightly softer stone can be a little bit more forgiving. A really, really hard finishing stone like this, there's no making any mistakes or errors without causing pretty significant damage to your edge. If you catch the wrong angle or you cut into the stone, it's going to break off a chunk of your bevel. All right, I'm getting a really, really strong stiction happening. And when the razor starts to chatter like that, I don't want to press too hard. So my over a decade of experience tells me that this razor is finished, but I'm gonna just show you guys one more technique too. If you don't have a diamond plate, I send our finishing stones with tomo nagura, which means matching or friend stone. If you're making a slurry with your slurry stone, you're gonna make the surface of the stone actually even finer than when you use the diamond plate technique. Diamond plates are gonna give you a matched slurry to the base stone and very, very fast cutting, but they tear up the surface of the stone a little bit more, even when you use a very mellow, worn out, fine diamond plate. So if you're really looking to max performance, use a tomo nagura. Now you want to take your time working up your slurry. You want to cover the whole surface of the stone evenly. You don't want to push too hard. Very light slurry here. Half of the equation of the sharpening effect is what the surface of the stone's smoothness is, and the other half is how much slurry you've got going. So this is a lighter slurry. I could have made it a little bit thicker, but for the sake of time and not making this video 2 hours long, that's enough slurry for now. Just gives my edge a little bit of cushion, keeps things gliding and floating as I sharpen. And this grit is extremely fast cutting. It's almost pure abrasive. The hardness of the stone is a big part of that. So that's how you use a tomo nagura if you don't have a diamond plate. I recommend having both. You could do it either way. And again, just doing my final, most light finishing touches on just water. By using zero pressure at all, I'm inviting the surface of the stone to do the lightest amount of carving into the bevel as it creates its scratch pattern. And I've really got firm sticking happening now. Like when I place the razor on the stone, it doesn't want to move. So very, very light pressure. Couple finishing strokes like that. The way you guys wipe your razor can mess it up. Go backwards, never towards the edge, or you'll cut yourself. And I could pinch like this, but I'm just a hair's width behind the edge, so I'm drying almost everything off, but I'm not using the edge because it will cut the towel. So backward motion like that. All right, there's that darkening effect towards the very edge of the edge. It's kind of a trick of the light because it's an LED light, but that's super, super hazy, sandblasted look to it. There might be just a little bit of a burr that stropping will take care of. So there's your final result. Most of the scratches are totally wiped out. from the Bevel. Very sandblasted final finish. There's some faint shadows left over from the bevel setting scratches, but this is a super, super sharp edge at this point. Now, I haven't done any stropping. A great test is if it can treetop. So I'm not actually touching my skin, I'm just catching arm hairs from above the skin like that. And then when you do shave, you want to see, did the hairs just pop off and totally run away from the edge? Because it should be effortless. Just like that. So that cuts hair before it even touches the skin. And there's this test some people do called a hanging hair test, where they'll hang a piece of hair and try to pop it and see what distance they can be from the edge. I personally am not a huge fan of the hanging hair test. I just prefer to shave arm hair, check the polish, and then strop. All right, so I've got this vintage Red Imp strop, and it's horse shell hide on one side and flax linen on the other. So before I strop, I usually just give it a quick brush off so that it's clean, and hold it a little bit taut, but not crazy tight. A little bit of that slack in it is a good thing. And sorry, going a little fast, but if you're a beginner, you want to set it down spine first, then lay the razor flat and move away from the edge, and then stop and lift up. And control your speed. It's when people set it down edge first, or they go too quick and pull towards themselves edge in, that problems happen. Somewhere around 25 or 50 is usually good enough. And with a razor that's well maintained, stropping can actually keep you going for a while. I like sharpening, so I usually sharpen on a finishing stone every couple times I shave with a razor, but you could probably go for quite a lot longer with using a strop. Oh yeah. And at that point, like, I don't need to touch the skin at all for it to shave hair. Super degree of tree topping happening. You should see that hazy sandblasted finish. You want almost all the scratches wiped out from your bevel setting stone by your finishing stone. If you use that 1-2 combo that we did, it's pretty quick work. And there should only really be maybe faint shadows of those 1,000 grit scratches left behind. Testing. Here's where my face is. Cool. Like butter. Okay, so generally I don't recommend dry shaving or shaving with just water. You should use shaving soap and a badger brush and do all your beard prep, but really no skin irritation because I use very light pressure and the razor is super sharp. Okay, so I recruited my roommate to help me out. I just did a neckline up. I'm gonna keep that in the video so you guys can laugh at it, but I'm gonna do a better angle shot. So just doing a quick dry shave, finished the razor on the ivory stone after we did bevel setting with the coarse grit moss flower. Again, that moss flower stone is between 600 and 2,000 grit. The beginning of the video goes over that. And then the ivory stones are super fine finishers, like well beyond 8,000 grit, maybe 20 to 30,000, rough estimate. So normally if you're gonna straight razor shave, I recommend you do a lot more beard prep, but I'm just gonna do a quick shave without any beard prep just to show off how sharp and smooth the edge is. So again, I kind of didn't get the right angle when I was shaving my neck. You can kind of see what I was doing, but I'm gonna do a quick line up here and you guys will actually be able to see. So there we go. Super smooth. You'll obviously get a little more skin irritation if you dry shave, but freshly honed blade, that's not as big of a deal. Obviously, you're going to get the best results if you use, you know, lather and don't rush it, but it's a nice, quick little lineup. All right, hope you guys enjoyed that. The main focus of this video was the sharpening. So if you want to see more on in-depth straight razor shaving where I do my full face, then check out some of the other videos on the Wild Whetstones YouTube channel. Come check out the Wild Whetstones Facebook community group, and we're going to do a giveaway. So it's early October 2025. If you're in the group, I'm going to give the details on the giveaway in the next few days, and we're also about to do a fall discount sale for 20% off, and these come around a few times a year. So if you're seeing this video months or years from now and you missed this one, come join the community or go to wildwhetstones.com and feel free to add your energy and email to the subscribers list on the homepage so you don't miss any notifications. See you guys in the next video. Stay sharp.